Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult video number 253, the effects of fame on spirituality. This is something that I was thinking actually about the Beatles in the context of this, specifically George Harrison and John Lennon and sort of on through. I don't know how religious Ringo is, and I think McCartney's always been just a standard Christian. He sort of just doesn't give a shit. But in terms of these two, you see the two perfect archetypes of what fame does to spirituality, I think, with John Lennon and George Harrison. Some of you, they're like, oh, these people suck, fucking hippies, and say, oh, the Beatles are pretty good. Stop it. You know that you enjoy listening to Revolution. It doesn't really matter if you're on the left or on the right. In fact, it's kind of an anti-left song at points, but you wouldn't understand. So here you've got these two people. They're in the same band and the same income bracket and so forth. They seem to have lived marginally, Christian by birth style lives before. And they take two totally radically different roads when it comes to the development of their spirituality, partially as a result of their exposure to fame. They both go through the sort of Hindu phase, Maguru sort of stuff. But when they emerge from that, they find radically different paths. John Lennon, as somebody who was always sort of a showman, he always enjoyed sort of being on stage, getting attention. He would tell funny jokes and do crazy shit. He was known to be prone to do those things. He was sort of a little bit like Elvis used to be. He took the path, his spirituality, he would throw spiritual jargon into his political diatribes. He was very public about it. Sort of wore it on his sleeve, even sort of dressed religiously at times. Understand around the time he's doing the sleep-in sort of stuff, he's sort of dressed like an Indian guru more than he is this psychedelic Beatle, sort of former Beatle rocker. George Harrison, meanwhile, by all accounts, for the large part, was more of a quiet person. He was rather shy, in fact, was reclusive fairly early on. And his spirituality took a different path. He puts it in the music, but he doesn't appear to have outwardly displayed it in the same politicized fashion. And I've noticed this. It's people, when they become well-known, especially if they become wealthy and or powerful, like if their fame leads to some sort of unofficial power, like an ability to exert influence over politics, economics, whatever, government certainly, if it comes to that, it tends to change and strain their spirituality. That is, that I think that in some part it makes it more difficult for them to identify with their fellow people, and so they either sort of declare themselves a savior figure, like John Lennon at times acted sort of like he thought he was kind of Jesus-like, not necessarily in the greatest of ways at all times. He became very, very pushy about it, very forceful, you could say, if you support it more, very activistic. Whereas George Harrison, faced with similar levels of fame, you think some of the best Beatles hits were his solo career did take off, Traveling Wilburys and so forth. He sort of keeps it in the background. For the most part, the public persona is almost completely divorced of it. It's like he almost feared having, I think, that level of exerted influence, in part because it takes such a mental strain on you. I think any degree of notoriety, yeah, even a relatively small degree of noteworthiness comes with stress. I don't think a lot of people realize it because, they don't really seek after that or they don't really capture it. Most people don't experience that. It does come with stress. I can only imagine what it would be like if you can't even go out for dinner without 20 people with cameras chasing you. It must be absolutely goddamn exhausting all of the time. At some point, you probably want a little bit of reclusiveness, unless you're one of those John Lennon types that wears everything on their sleeve, and then your spirituality, much like your politics and so forth, ends up just being part of a very, very public, very, very forceful persona. And it's sort of like a chaotic whirlwind of character, you could say. I don't know. I was just thinking about that because I was thinking, I think I was listening to the Traveling Wilburys and I thought about George Harrison, and then I thought about Hinduism, and then I thought about the difference between him and John Lennon, and then I, wrote an Occult video out. I think that it's good to maintain balance, so I think, it's probably more spiritually healthy. I mean, for the authentic experience, being forthcoming, trying to educate if you can, trying to talk about it if you want to, but at the same time, there's got to be something left for yourself. Because otherwise, you become almost just a public brand. And it's interesting to note that the Beatle that was most, anti-establishment, corporate wrong, Uncle Sam wrong. Interesting that he was the one that branded himself that way. Literally becomes sort of that brand. It's like the sketch of John Lennon's face becoming the cover of Imagine. It's different. It's totally different. It feels different even from the outside looking in. There's sort of an energy you can sort of feel when you're even listening to their music. Even that got bled into by their spiritual beliefs in a very, very big way. And this is not just, the case with these two particular individuals. You can see it all the time. You see it on YouTube with people that talk about such things. When people become more notable as they progress, as they become more and more potentially influential, you see, I think there's also outside pressure. It's like I remember convert seeking used to be common on YouTube. Now, I was not particularly well known until the 2016 era, but I can remember even when I was like, just had a little bit of an audience, I can remember people from a dozen different fucking religions constantly trying to proselytize. Now YouTube doesn't have a messaging system anymore, so that thankfully has ended. They'll still leave comments though, most of which get swept up in the spam filter. You should see some of the convert seeking that remains even to this day. It's just ineffective. Trying to get you to worship, like saying you should become Islamic, you should join, the Orthodox Church. Why don't you become a Catholic and take communion? Why don't you consider Hinduism and stuff? I mean, Hare Krishna worship, Mormonism. Mormonism is a big one. Jehovah's Witnesses. It's almost like the Jehovah's Witnesses, they do their door knocking on the internet now. They knock at your email instead of at your physical door. They stopped knocking, by the way. Funny story, at my door in Rutland. Because I showed up, I put on, when I saw them coming, I realized it was the Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. And so, I dress like this on a normal basis, but I put on my pentagram and like the demon shirt and stuff, and then answered the door and like, oh, you have time to talk about like Jehovah's, the Jesus or whatever. I'm like, oh, this is a satanic household. And then they said, oh, and then they turned around and they left. They got trolled. They haven't come back since. So, after like 10 years or something, they'll probably return to knocking, and I'll have to find some other way to troll them. Of course, I can't say, I'm a Satan now. I'll have to I'll put a loincloth on, and I'll have a big beef bone and a cup of ale, and I'll be like, oh no, I worship Thor. May thunder strike you down. I don't know, I'm just mouthing off at some point. That's about all. Peace out.